Homer, Kevin Loring Squest. I am coming to you from the unceded, unsurrendered territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe in Ottawa, Ontario. And I am joined today by my elder Sharon Spinks from the Lytton First Nation and my bro and friend and collaborator Ronnie Dean Harris to talk to you about some really wonderful, important work that we've been doing over the last number of years involving wax cylinder recordings from 100 years ago of Nlaka'pamux singers and storytellers, and our creation stories, the stories that are the foundational stories that include our cosmologies and our laws and many of our wonderful characters from our history and our culture as Nlaka'pamux people. Kʷukʔscéyp. Sharon just wanted to start us off with a really beautiful invocation of nature to get us started off in a good way. Sharon, did you want to share that with us?
Okay, Homer. Qut wish to come kindaya to DJ Lexozot. To la qut la wish to come kindaya to DJ Lexozot. At la takam da me moy, takam da jigap, kindaya to DJ Lexozot. At takam da shielagan a mushalagan. Kindaya to DJ Lexozot. التاكم ده هلاو أنا كشكانستيس نايب استمتدكش خاني استمتدكش خنوخ كندية دوديش أي لكزو زود Homer. From the river and all living things, we humbly ask, help us so that we can be strong today. And from the river to the highest mountain, we humbly ask, help us so that we can be strong today. And the two-legged animals and the four-legged animals help us so that we can be strong today. And all the grass and all Mother Earth help us so that we can be strong today. And the sacred eagle that flies over us and watches us and takes us away from sickness, help us so that we can be strong today. Homer, kūkʔscéyp, Homer.
Kūkʔscéyp. Thank you so much for that, Sharon. Maybe I'll just get us. I'll get you to introduce yourselves and to talk about where you're from and all of that. So I'll start off with Ronnie. Maybe you can give a little introduction.
Hi everyone, Ronnie Dean Harris, Malithuk and Squash, Tel Squee. My name is Ronnie Dean Harris. My ancestral name is Malithuk. That name comes from Chief James of Yale. My family's come from also Nlaka'pamux territories from Spuzum, but also Stalo, Litwat territories as well. My formative arts practice was in hip hop mostly till I met Kevin Loring and started kind of embarking into some different works. So now my position is Indigenous Cultural Development Director at the Massey Theatre, using research and design to sort of activate some cultural and historical understanding to the city of New West. And I'm happy to be here, happy to be amongst you guys as well.
Awesome. Kūkʔscéyp. Thanks, Ronnie. And Sharon, you want to give yourself a little introduction for our watchers?
Okay, Homer, Sharon and Squash and Sharon Spinks. I'm an Nlaka'pamux elder from Lytton, British Columbia, and I have been in training and in the helping field for so long. I can't count the years I've been in the helping field, but the other thing that I've done is I've kept my language, and now I'm involved with helping out with plays and skits with Kevin Loring, and thoroughly enjoyed anytime I'm working with Kevin. And also I'm involved with the K4, K5 immersion in Stein Valley School, and going on the third year. So it's been challenging because I can't keep up with the K4 and K5 when they run away on me. But I'm also involved with helping. I've never stopped helping residential school survivors overcome and look for a new future for themselves. And it's a difficult work, but it can be done and has been done. And I commend all the residential school survivors that have found a new path for themselves. And that is one of the things that I see it as in the future. We need to step away from things that are holding us back. And that is negativism on a person. It doesn't belong to us because we were born perfect. We were born without malice. We were born without indecisions. And we need to grab that towards us and then move from there. This is what I've seen many residential school survivors do. They've turned their life around because of the freedom. It is a freedom from all the negativism that that is infiltrated into us. And when once we get rid of that, the freedom, and I felt it myself, but I've been working 40 years to get rid of that and look at the future. And the future is beautiful. Okay, homat kūkʷscéyp, homat.
That was a really great introduction. That was really powerful. Thanks for that, Charon. Um, yeah, I just want to say for folks who don't know who I am, I'm an actor and a playwright. I'm Nlaka'pamux, like my bro Ronnie there and Sharon. I come from the same community that Sharon is from. I come from Lytton, um, and I'm proud of that, of where I come from. I was born and raised there, and I have so much family there. And Sharon is also part of my family there as well. Uh, and we are really proud, strong people, and have a long history of being proud and strong people in the Fraser Canyon, in that area there. Um, my work as a playwright, I wrote a play about residential school survivors called Where the Blood Mixes, that won the Governor General's Award in 2009 and has toured the country a few times. And I've written other plays as well. And one of the projects that I brought to the community is this play creation project that we call Songs of the Land, that is about taking our creation stories that have been recorded by various people over the years, ethnographers in particular, and translated sort of like in a sort of Cole's Notes version into these sort of short understandings of what these great big epic stories once were. And so what we've been doing out of this project has been is taking those stories and turning them into plays, and typically plays with music. So I've been been writing original songs alongside like with myself and Sandy Schofield, and in the early days of the project with Ronnie Morrisseau as well. Other Indigenous professional artists, and what we do is we create these stories by bringing in a team of professional artists, and we've built an ensemble of community members. Sharon is one of those community members who's become a real integral part of that group, and it's really grown over the years. It started off as really just a small little sort of idea that has really become kind of the central practice of Savage Society. This, Savage Society is a company that I founded really to sort of create a platform for myself in the early days, just to get my work up onto the stage. And this project was one of the projects that I started with the company. And this project is now the Songs of the Land project has grown to be sort of the central sort of thing that we do every year. Of course, interrupted by the pandemic, but we're still planning for when we can get back together and join everybody in the community hall again, and do the really fun work that we've been doing for the last, since 2013. But really the project started in the very beginning with the first Words of Our Chiefs production that we did at Cook's Ferry in 2010. I was commissioned by the Kŵukws-Ferry First Nation in Spence's Bridge to present something to honor the 100th anniversary of the Laurier Memorial. And the Laurier Memorial was a petition that was put forward by the Allied Interior Tribes of British Columbia in 1910 to Sir Wilfrid Laurier, who is on a campaign train trip across the country trying to get support for re-election to be the prime minister. And the chiefs of the interior tribes, the allied interior tribes, Nlaka'pamux, Sketakwl, and Syilx, and a number of other nations gathered in Spence's Bridge and drafted this petition to Laurier to honor the inherent rights of the Indigenous people of British Columbia. And they presented that to Laurier when he stopped on his campaign trip in Kamloops. And the document that came out of that, which was apparently transcribed by James Tate, who was an ethnographer who recorded many of the wax cylinder recordings that we use in our project, and did a lot of the field notes that we reference as source material for a lot of the cultural work that we do, just as a reference to check with our own understandings of what that cultural material is. So he wrote this amazing document that really was an assertion of Indigenous sovereignty in the BC interior. And what we did was we turned it into a play. We split the document into several voices, and myself and Ron and Sam Bob, and who else was in that one? I can't remember at the top there. The first one, we did it so many times now. Oh, Kim Harvey. Yeah, we presented that in Kamloops first we did it at Kŵukws-Ferry, at the Kŵukws-Ferry First Nation in Spence's Bridge, and then we presented it at the powwow grounds at Kamloops powwow grounds in Kamloops that summer as a commemoration of that 100th year anniversary. And so that was the first time we really did that kind of work in community, presented a play, and it sort of gave me this idea of really going further with that and exploring some of the other works that Tate had transcribed over the years, and exploring those creation stories and looking at those wax cylinder recordings that he had made as a means of developing new plays that we could do in the community with the community. And so I really began on a journey of exploring what that would be like and what that would require. And the first thing that came to my mind was, well, we need the community to be involved. And we need the community to hear what the community feels about us using this material. Our creation stories, our Sketakwl stories, and these wax cylinder recordings. And so came up with the idea of hosting a week-long gathering in Lytton where we feasted and we invited the community in to have a real fulsome conversation about this material. So about the wax cylinder recordings of our people singing songs. Some of them are like medicine songs, others are like social songs. There's the whole range, right? But to have a real fulsome conversation about what the community felt was important, whether or not we should even be doing this work. That was the first question I put forward to the community, was whether or not we should even be engaging in this work and touching these materials and using them in this way. And we had Jimmy Tudlikin, your cousin there, Charon, and many of the other cultural experts of our nation. Really, we had 4 dialects of the Nlaka'pamux language represented in the language speakers in that gathering. We had leadership from tribal, and many of the chiefs from the Nlaka'pamux nation showed up throughout that week. And at the end of it all, we shared our findings with the community, and we feasted again. And we even went to Stein, which is our spiritual. The spiritual heart of the Nlaka'pamux nation, and we did a song sharing and storytelling gathering down on the banks of the Stein River. So I'm just curious what your guys' thoughts are, or memories of, or things that sort of stick out in your mind from that time when we were engaging in that work. At the time, I didn't really know what I was doing, to be totally honest. I was like, I have this idea. I don't really know how to go about doing it. So I thought, well, we would take it to the community and ask what they thought. And they could very well have told me, no, what do you think you're doing, Lauren? And so I'm just curious what your recollection of that time was like when we were doing that week-long symposium. Maybe I'll start with you, Sharon. Do you have any memories of that time? Things that stick out in your mind of that week we did?
Yeah, kʷukʔscéyp. Definitely, I feel that also, I keep adding, to the healing process of the community. And I really feel that when you came in and worked with us, and a group of us all got together, and we stuck together. We kept nudging each other. Oh, we got to go practice. We got to go practice. So that's what we did. We kept nudging each other and doing working with your guidance, Kevin. But overall, I've heard it from other elders that were a little bit too scared to come out and say kʷukʔscéyp, Kevin. And it's a residue from the residential school that I felt that for a long time, like I'm always doing something wrong. And that was a phrase, that I had to get rid of out of my system. But I really feel overall that people that came and said, Kevin's doing really good. He's right with the people. And I said, go and tell him. But it's that fear of doing something wrong, and it comes from the residential school symbol, I guess. But it really affected everybody in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And it's a good step towards doing things for themselves, sharing with family members, and saying, you did really good in the play. That was awesome. And there was, I feel that that was like opening a new door for ourselves, and opening it to the community. And I think that's left an impression that I truly feel that we're all looking forward to another one. When's the next one coming up?
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a big part of like the motivation to do the work in this way too is to be a direct counter to that legacy of St. George's Residential School in our community. And that to really try to counter all of that how we were shut down culturally. We didn't really, as a kid, I didn't really grow up with a lot of those stories. I sort of went searching for them, and I would hear little bits here and there. Sometimes that Rosie Williams would tell little stories maybe, or other people in the community. Sometimes when I was a kid, I used to sit with Louis and he'd tell some stories. And Norman Dunstan, I used to go sit with him at the hospital, and he'd tell some stories as well. But always this little, you get little bits, and I'd always want more. And so this was a really great way to try to explore those stories and to learn more about our culture, and to try to embody that work, and to share it with the community so that they could understand that this is their legacy, these are their stories, and that was a which most of us, we didn't grow up with, right? Like we'd have to go digging for it to find it. And so I wanted to try to make it really much more readily available to the community, and for them to be able to see it and feel those stories in a real way on the land. Ronnie, do you have any memories from that time when we were doing that work that stick out in your mind?
Yeah. My involvement was mostly technical at first. Just using software to clean up these wax cylinder recordings. So it was the first time I'd heard of them, but was instantly very interested in these recordings and what they meant, which was hard to interpret because we didn't have a lot of info about them back then. It was just a bunch of recordings in 700 to 800 megabyte files, just in piles, some sped up, some slowed down, very staticky. So, you know, in some of the songs, they would have these intros like, oh, this is a Sweat Lodge song, Crane song, but some of them you wouldn't have an interpretation. So I remember, I think it was awesome because in the magnitude of that work, you know, I did at that time, I didn't know what was happening really. I was just there to participate in a new community that I hadn't spent a lot of time in, with whom I now understand to be really important elders of the Nlaka'pamux consciousness. So I was, you know, been super honored to be like, oh, I was sat beside these people and like, you know, got to like witness conversations. I remember there was like an hour-long conversation about one syllable and how that one syllable could change the entire consciousness of the conversation. So really, really important language stuff. And I think some really important conversations that need to be had. And I think from my understanding now, need to be had almost on a yearly basis or a 4-year basis of what do we do with digital recordings and what is the pathway of how we manage, disseminate, and activate the not just song recordings, but archival materials and stuff that's on paper, not just activate it in the way that we can understand it, but like activate it into communities. So because, you know, you can throw an essay at somebody and be like, hey, there's stuff about our grandpa in here. And they'll just be like, okay, right? But if you can disseminate it and you can, nowadays, if you can make it into a podcast or a meme or something like that, like it's people are going to like be interested and want a new pathway into it. And unfortunately, because of pop culture, that's kind of how we think. So as artists, right, that it gets me thinking like, well, how do we get this from a circle of elders to the young people, right? Yeah. So that's, for me, it's kind of been created like another arc of work in my life from that point there, from like having elders say, well, we want to understand these recordings more. We want to understand what they're about. We want them separated. We want to be able to access them in a different way. Kind of, for me, it was like as a media artist, as a creator in media, it kind of got my gears spinning. Like, well, what can I contribute to this? And there was a lot of things, and so that's kind of been the steady, the slate of this work now is sort of this labor of love of like accessing all the files, separating them, labeling them, cataloging them, indexing them with connected materials so that we can interpret them. And then so that we can have the next generation who comes along, these wax cylinders, go, oh, look at this, and have a critical mass of materials that they can reinterpret them like we're doing. So, you know, as these stories get passed along to generations, there are new interpretations, there's new inflections. And I think the more we can give our young people to make a definite, a stronger interpretation of the messages that were left in there, I think it's going to be an awesome feature for arts and creation. So
yeah,
some of the stuff that I've gotten from all that.
Yeah, I know, like we've known each other for about 20 years, longer maybe, Ronnie. And when I first met you, I just knew you as you were like your Stolo roots. But then during the course of this project, we realized that you're in Nlaka'pamux, like your family's from Spuzum.
Yeah, I mean, you know, displacement wise, you know, during the gold rush, our Spuzum family was, you know, pushed out of Spuzum, a lot of us, and through displacement, we ended up in Seabird Island. And so you grew up in the Stalo boundary, and I was like, I'm Stalo, right? You when you're young, you kind of take on the identification that's given you, I guess, geographically. So it was interesting that in my 20s I had to find out that I'm Nlaka'pamux. It took me a couple of years just to learn how to say Nlaka'pamux, let alone start to try to understand the cultural nuances of it. And so, but it started to make a lot of sense. You know what I mean? Like language wise, I was like, oh, that's what my grandma, that's how I know these words, right? But in a Stalo geographic range. And so it's been an awesome journey of just sort of discovering Nlaka'pamux culture and doing my best to sort of in the wake of the research just organize all this stuff so that whoever finds it after me is going to be like boom, right? And I think that's part of what we're all doing, is that in our path of researching and revitalizing our own bundles of culture, it's like we meet up with other people doing that work and we organize the bigger bundle together so that we know where we're at. So it's an awesome conversation to be a part of.
Very cool. Yeah, I remember that conversation. I think it was more like 3 hours, and it was about like they were listening to a song, and the language, we had all four dialects represented of the language speakers in the nation, and they were listening to the one syllable that the singer was singing, and they were saying it that placed him on the river at a certain point on the river because of his dialect. And there was this debate that went on and on and on and on. I thought it was so fascinating. Some of the other things that came up too is I remember really clearly in that week, we had things like when we first were gathering and we were having these conversations around the table with all these our fluent language speakers and our elders and medicine people and leadership. I remember one of the people that were there leaning over to me and saying like, "This never happens," and I'm like, "What do you mean?" "Well, they're all agreeing this never happens." Nobody's telling anybody to be quiet or shut up or shutting them down. It was a positive conversation, and there was no shame being thrown at anyone. Again, because of that, like as you said, Sharon, and again, that's what this person said to me too. Is because of the residential school, there's a lot of shame and blame that gets passed around and lateral violence, and there was none of that week. It was such a positive experience, I think, for everybody involved. It was for me. It was a transformative experience for me. And like I said, I didn't know what I was doing. I just created basically a really loose framework that we could have these conversations in, and I didn't know where it was going to go. We really only had one question that I wanted to answer, which was, should we or shouldn't we? I needed the community to sort of say, go forth and go ahead and go do this work, or to tell me not to, because we're not ready to touch that material yet. And I remember really distinctly, Sharon, one moment where we were having a debate about whether or not we should use these songs. In particular, I chose the most sort of extreme example that I could find in the collection, which I think was Tommy Lick's Medicine Song. And I asked the communities, like, here's a medicine man song. It's been recorded 100 years ago on wax cylinder recordings. Should we or should we not be listening and using this song for anything that we're doing? And we had a really big debate about it. And at the end of it, it wasn't really clear. And I said, well, maybe we shouldn't. And it sort of let it sit for about 10, 15 minutes. And then you stood up, Sharon, and you gave a really impassioned speech about why we should be using this material. Do you remember that moment at all in that week?
Yeah, it was, thinking about it, it's like combining, the elders and their song and getting us to join up, so that we also feel that healing power that's in the song. It's hard to identify exactly the healing quality of that song, but when you hear it, it brings you to a whole. You become a whole person, and because of those many of the songs, that it's a symbol of healing and moving forward. They are songs that encourage the babies to hear it and also memorize it, put it in the back of their mind, so that they become that one person, that without pain, without grief, without hurt and indecision. There's so many things that fall on our path, and then when those songs come up, we become one, we become whole. That's what all those songs, any singer's song, and if they say this is a song for healing, this is a song for weddings, this is a song, it's always what is so beautiful about all those songs. And my cousin Ernie, he does wonderful songs, and
Ernie
it,
Michelle.
yeah, Ernie Michelle. It I guess the only way to interpret it, because it's so hard to find the right interpretation into English from Nlaka'pamux.
Yeah.
I'm always having that problem. And it's like a cleansing.
Mm.
It cleanses your spirit, and but it re-energizes us. It re-energizes us to say, oh, this is a brand new day. I'm going to do wondrous things today. It re-energizes you. And then that's what I learned that from my uncle Tala. That's my mother's brother, and he was forever in crutches because he had polio when he was little, and so he never was able to walk. So my uncle Tala, we would sit and listen to him, and he'd say, that's one of the messages that I grew up listening to him, that you were born without hurt and pain. To go back to that, you need to hear the songs. And he used to sing every night at Ashteetlm, where I grew up, and he would sing, and the songs that he sang, it is beautiful. So that's the way I interpret many of our elders' songs. They are sacred, and we can't copy them because we need not only their permission, but it is sung in his or her way, and even if we try it, we'll never get it right. So we don't need to knock ourselves down because we couldn't, but just take the messages. Take the message that it gives you. If that makes sense, I hope.
No, that makes perfect sense. I remember really clearly you saying, like, if we don't pick this up, who will? Right? Like, if we don't take these songs and we don't pick this work up, who's going to do it? Right? As I remember you saying in that,
Yeah.
when you were
Yeah.
talking about how it's okay to use this material, because like you say, like a lot of times when they recorded it, it's not the same as when they were using it in ceremony too, right? Like it's that because that I remember that really clearly, that moment when you said that, when you sit up and you said that. It was really impassioned, but it also was the moment that everybody was nodding their heads and said, yeah, okay, go ahead and do this work. That was the real pivotal moment. It was right in the middle of the week, and it was and that was the big question, right? Like that was the one question that I really wanted to ask the community was, should we even be working in this way? And that answered that. When you stood up like that, that answered that question for the community, I think, because everybody got on board and said, yeah, we should do this work. And that gave us a green light to go forward and to do the work that we did in the years later. But before that moment, it was always a big question.
Yeah.
And whenever there's that uncertainty, there's always a chance for people to shut it down or to throw doubt into it. But that moment was a real clear moment, I think, for all of us in the room, that we should go forward and do this work. And I'm always really grateful for that moment. I think about it all the time. So kʷukʔscéyp for that.
Yeah, I mean, since we've done that work, we've acquired a lot of support materials for the wax cylinders. And some of the materials that I had that were given to me on that weekend is actually videos of a symposium held by Wendy Wickwire in the 90s, where Sharon's mom is there, and that generation of elders is working on these wax cylinders and listening to them and singing them. And so there's been there's some vested interest in it, and I think it's like we've kind of picked up on a bit of that work and are continuing to kind of gather and organize the information about these songs so that they can be better interpreted.
Yeah, and for our listeners, Wendy Wickwire is an ethnomusicologist who was working out of UVic, who's done over decades has done a number of a number of projects involving our songs and recordings from many of our elders back in the day.
Yeah,
And
some of the materials that Wendy had that she gave to us were recordings sitting with elders listening to the wax cylinders. And so from that, you know, I was able to start to try to understand what some of these songs were. And, you know, in that sense of how elders speak in giant circles, be able to like take myself on journeys and be like, oh, we got to listen to this song here to connect it with this song and this story or this person. And you know, being able to try to capture all those bits of data and then like disseminate it so that we can interpret it. It's been a, you know, I think I don't know how many hours of Annie Yerk tapes I've listened to since.
those tapes are wonderful, right? Because Annie's
Yeah.
personality really shines through in those recordings.
Yeah. And so, you know, it's still a lot of information to go through, and I've been working on it for most of my spare time since 2013 or something like that. We just acquired a whole bunch more stuff from the Maris Barbeau collection, who is another ethnographer around James Tate. So like sheet music of some of these songs, of like Tetnalita songs, further interpretations. But because it's scattered between the collections and it's scattered between people's disseminations and the way they've just cross-referenced stuff, it's hard for us as just normal people to kind of just sit with it and be like, oh, this is what they meant, so let's make our interpretation of it. Instead, you have to become an academic and start gathering these things and,
Right.
right, and finding access and finding ways to organize it. And so as a research dork myself, I just love to research on my spare time. This is great. So I just like try to put things out so that we can like take it and we're going to hand it to these kids and they're going to show us what it really means one day. And it's going to,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and Wendy was a part of that week too. She gave
Mhm.
a lecture well, it was basically, I think maybe it was an intro to her book even, uh, or at least that involved parts of that because she was at the time working on her book that is now complete. At the Bridge, I believe it's called. But I think what that references is Spence's Bridge, where James Tate, the ethnographer that we've been talking about a few times here, he emigrated to and married into the tribe there, and met a lot of the people that he recorded. Yeah, it was a pretty special time that week in 2013, in the summer there. So many things came out of it, and the biggest thing for me was the community gathering, and all the people, because we didn't invite people in specifically necessarily. We just made a broad invitation saying like we're going to talk about songs and stories, and anybody's welcome. And everybody showed up. Like people from Merritt showed up, people from Nicola Valley, people from Spuzum, people from all over. We had Grand Chiefs coming through. We had the local chiefs. We had so many people were interested in the subject matter that we were talking about and the way that we were doing it, and curious about what we were going to do. I remember what is it? One time somebody came up to me and said, "What do you mean you're going to take our stories?" I was like, no. And it's not like that. We're going to tell our stories. I'm not taking anything, is really, I think, the difference that happens a lot of times, because people come into the community from outside and they want to extract stories from us, right? And then they go and use them for their own purposes. But the whole point of this project was to bring these stories up and out for the community to look at, and these songs, and to have a real discussion about what they mean to us, and to try to find a way to share them with our people, in a really good way that involved them. And so after that week, I sort of was like, "Whoa, okay, so now now the community has said that they support this work. Now what do we do?" And so it was another 2 years, in fact, until we actually got back into the community with a plan to begin to build a show. And so it was like not till 2015 that we did the first show. And in that time, I had a number of talks with Ardith, who's now on the Supreme Court of Canada, believe it or not. She's now been appointed to the Supreme Court. But Ardith has done a lot of work on Indigenous law, and I did some work with her and a number of other of our people from Lytton and the Nlaka'pamux Nation, talking about how our stories, our Sketakwl stories, and Sketakwl talks about what that references is the time when animals were like people, and they had like they were in the bodies of people with like the animal characteristics of the animals that their name comes from. So like ducks would have like really beautiful feathers for hair kind of thing, but they were like people. That's the era in our stories called and those beings that are like animal beings that are like people are called Sketakwl. And so we've been calling them Sketakwl stories. But Ardith was talking about how in our stories our stories are embedded with our law. And so one of the examples that was given at that week-long, I keep calling it a symposium, that week-long gathering, was the Battle of the Birds story. And that was the first play that we did. It was to take that story, which is a story of domestic abuse, essentially. Domestic abuse, power abuse, bullying, involving, the bird nation, with the main sort of bad guy being Eagle. And that Eagle is cruel to his wife and humiliates her and abuses her in front of the community. And the community comes together to protect her and to sort of try to save her from her abusive husband. And he comes in and attacks and fights his way through his own community, but in the end is defeated by Red Hawk, who defeats him by being blessed by his wife, Eagle's wife, and just by his intellect and his wit and his speed and his pure heart, or her pure heart. In the end, we ended up, when we did the play, we cast a 6-year-old girl to play Red Hawk, and that had a different kind of resonance. Just because it's, big. I played the Eagle, and we had our little Rachel playing Red Hawk, and there was a real power dynamic there between a little girl beating up the bully and me being the bully. Do you have any thoughts on that production that we did, Sharon? That first one, the Battle of the Birds.
Oh, lots. I think about that often, and I going back to my culture, there's got to be a reason that I have you in my files. So every now and then when I'm looking for something, I'll pull out Battle of the Birds and I'll look at it and reminisce, the things that we had to do to make a go of it. And again, one of the things I want to just cut in here is when I do that, I do a yummy. That is a part of our culture. When we are going to listen to someone's song, when we are going to listen to a legend, we, as a person listening, the listener, our culture is that we say, kʷukʔscéyp, thank you for letting me hear these lessons that you have to share with us, that we yamit. So when I pull out your file, I yamit to the people that are in the story itself. Our culture is that we give thanks to the creator for putting that story in front of me so that I can learn and I can teach others from that. So I feel again that all of us that were involved in that, and I had quite a time because I was also working for the Hope School District, and I kept getting called out for training over the summer, and that's why I was late for getting to the Vancouver showing there. But I think that with all of us coming together, even Ethan, he was crying in one of our one of our plays there. Um,
He was just a baby.
yeah, he was a baby then. Yeah, little Ethan. Um,
Mhm.
but it again, it connects us. It connects the community. And like I said earlier, that there were our people that came up and said, we did a good job. And I told them, go over and tell Kevin. Um, it is like Ronnie is saying, he's learning to say in Nlaka'pamux words, and that's what life is all about. Is that we go back, even if we have never heard Hazom uh, Hazom is something is big. When you come to it, you're making that connection, even if you have a hard time saying the words. And this is what my teaching is, and Ronnie's helping me with it, that we are going to make that connection. It may take a while, but when we make that connection, then we are whole. Everyone is whole. And you have so much energy that you almost don't know what to do with it when we get through that. So with Battle of the Birds, it connected us. We were all like speaking the same language, whether it's in Nlaka'pamux or English. We were doing the things that you wanted us to do, Kevin, and we did a network, and it was a beautiful feeling. And I wish somehow we could interpret that into like what we're supposed to be doing here is putting up a discussion about what was it again, the uh, discrimination. I can't find it right now. If we could, I've been thinking about it. How can we draw in the people that are having a hard time looking at minority people through their eyes? How can we get them to look at where we are and then make at least come to understand that we are one in this university, in this universe, I mean. So in that play, I think we all made that connection. We were as one. We listened to what you wanted us to do. We did our best to do that, to follow it, and then we went on to put the play on with good hearts.
Mm.
And it really came out in the community that they loved what we all did. And it was definitely through your guidance, Kevin, that
Uh,
that that we made that connection, and we became whole. Even with little Ethan crying, that's okay. That's, he was just a baby. Yeah.
yeah, I mean that's the beautiful thing about this project is that it's so intergenerational. Like we literally have babies who are in harnesses on that first production who are now like little toddlers running around in the other productions, and but we also have like great grandmothers and grandmothers and and parents and youth and kids and folks in their 20s and teenagers, and we have the whole range of ages within our community involved in the project. There's almost 40 people now in the ensemble, including
Mm-hmm.
the artists. And the artists are really diverse too in terms of discipline, like musicians, actors, dancers. Ronnie's a hip hop artist when he joined this project. Like I got him doing plays, and but there's a real mix of people, and
It's
even
the
like
only plays I'll do. So
fair,
don't come looking for me for plays.
fair enough. Uh, but we have a real mix of people. But the what I really love about it though too is that the community feel that it is like when we go and we gather at the community hall to do the rehearsals. People bring food. Everybody brings food or stuff from their garden, and Albert brings some stwen and smoked fish, and we all share in that, and
Mm-hmm.
but also what's really beautiful to watch that I really observe is intergenerational teaching that goes on. So we have like yourself and Auntie Amy, and folks sharing, you know, their understanding and their knowledge and their love with the kids, with the other artists, with everybody. And there's a real exchange between the artists and the community members, because the artists generally, they come from different communities. They're from all over. And they come with their own understandings, and so we're welcoming them in as guests, and they're always, I find, really blown away by the generosity of our community and how welcoming we are to these folks and to do this work. I just really, I selfishly, like, I created the project so I could have an excuse to go home in the summertime and to work in the way that I work, which is very different from most people in Lytton. I went off to the city to go be a theater artist, but I got a whole bunch of training, and I wanted to share that with the community in a good way. Is really what I wanted to do, right? Like, and so this project was a way for me to get back home, to do the work that I do, typically in like professional theater settings, but to do it in our own way, which is more about community, which is more centered on the community, and to build a structure, really, like the way in which the ensemble works is we work around the needs of the community. So in the summer, when people are fishing on the river to get their salmon, we try to accommodate the times of the kids, and when they're, you know, when they're going to be busy, or when the parents are going to be busy, or when they're going to be on the river, or, you know, so we have a really loose schedule for the community to come to be a part of it when they're available. And we try not to work people too hard, you know, and to make it fun. And this last summer was the first time in a long time we hadn't been back home to do that work, and it was brutal.
I was in Lytton every year since 2013 up until last year.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and I just really missed that time. This pandemic has got to go away so we can get back home.
I think one of the biggest things about the stories that I've learned, I mean, off the top, it was amazing to learn that there were these archival materials that we could hear our ancestors and access songs from antiquity. But connected to that material is the ethnographic materials of James Tate and the other, you know, ethnographers of the time, recording like this epic cosmology of our ancestors, full of stories, full of symbol, full of syntax, and connected to land, connected to culture, cosmology, and a deeper knowledge than is given credit to by Western academics. So I think for me is like being able to access these accounts of these stories so that we could interpret the symbols back into the language and the syntax of it, so that we can sort of understand the same way that people are able to go, oh, in Leviticus, blah, 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 right? Or, oh, and this Job said this, and they'll go back to the Quran or to their ancient scripture and be able to anecdote and go, oh, they made this decision, so this is a guidance to our values. Or even the same way that pop culture, you can go, hey, on The Simpsons, remember when he did this? It's like this. We should be able to do that with Coyote stories. We should be able to do that with the stories of you know, Meadowlark and of Beaver. And so this work for me has become part of that. How do we get these stories back into, if we can't do it in oral culture, we have to gather it somewhere so people can start to activate it and it becomes a process. So becoming oral culture is the aspiration. For me, this work of, here's a story, let's tell it. What do you notice about it? What values do you think have to be in it? What are our values now to be interpreted into the story? And so, you know, and now the work that I've kind of got into is like back down to base level of just creating coloring sheets that include some of these stories and symbols and language so that the kids can understand it. And that's what's important. I spent my time writing rap for other rappers and like that only nerd rappers would ever understand. So now finding these cultural materials and going, well, you can create something that other artists are going to go, oh, that's awesome. But it has to reverberate from the youngest person in the room to the oldest person in the room. And I think that was the value and the brilliance of our ancestors and the way they put these stories together, the way they put them and organize them, that activates that memory in us. So when we hear them, we're like, yeah, yeah. And then one of the best parts about doing those stories, like Battle of the Birds, because we did it first, was hearing some of the people going, oh no, it's different this way, or yeah, I remember that part. Oh no, I remember it this way. And there's no one way about these stories. All the accounts are right because all the interpretations include all the values that the person who's passing it forward has in it. So you know, and this connects to like the work that you know, the generations before us did, but also like the gatherings our people used to have before contact, where in the same way, sun ceremonies and winter ceremonies in the lodge is taking 4 days to tell a story, you know. And so yeah, it for me it's exciting work, and I think it's something that I hope that other people get involved in and know that they have really like they have something to offer to it, right? I think a lot of us like, oh, I don't know. It's like, you know, one little thing that could change this whole story and make it complete. So, you know, it's great to see more and more people. I remember we had to chase people down that first couple of years, but now it's like you don't have to chase people down. You get to the hall and it's just packed. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's really, I was, you know, the more we've done it, like the first year we did it, I kind of had to coax people to sort of get out up onto the floor and do the work. Now when we gather, it's like boom, everybody's like on point. And then I mean, we could begin creating almost on day one. Now we have such a shorthand and such a language around the way in which we work. We really have truly created an ensemble. We have our own methodology. We have our own approach. We have our own aesthetic, and we have our own process and how we deal with the work and how we engage with it and how we move it forward. And it's I mean, every time I'm so proud and blown away by the community and how they respond in the hall. Yeah, and the stories themselves are awesome. Like I did a workshop back in the day on Greek tragedies, and it was like a 3 week long. The NAC used to do this thing called the ARC, and it was essentially like a research and development sort of study with like scholars and historians and people. And we did one on the Greeks. And this was in the 2000s on Greek tragedy. And I remember the historian saying that we have these Greek, all of these, because we have a number of these stories that have been turned into plays, because originally they were plays, right? But they, you know, the whole pantheon, or the whole sort of canon of Greek literature that we have, a lot of it comes from pottery shards. We know the content of these stories based on how they were represented in pottery shards. And I remember in that lecture, a light bulb went off for me. And this is like a few years before we did the first, and there's a number of, it was about 7 years actually before we did the first show. But in that moment, a light bulb went off for me, going like, well, we got way more than pottery shards. Like, we have these stories. Like, we know these stories. They're just not being shared. And so, you know, this entire, you know, there's the people who have their whole career is studying the tragedies and comedies of the Greeks, right? And they piece them together literally through pottery shards. And so for us to have all of this material, this cultural material that was recorded by our ancestors for a future generation to pick up and to take forward and to do and to remember and to use in their own way, is really that the center of the work, right? Is to try to revitalize that cultural material in a way that in a context that we in this era, this generation, can grasp. And that's really the heart of the project. And in amongst that sort of mission or whatever is all of this wonderful community engagement that has been a complete revelation for me. like artistically and personally, because it is so personal. It is with the community that I'm from, and with the culture that in many ways was almost eradicated through residential school and that legacy, and being, you know, the legacies of colonialism that have imposed themselves upon so many Indigenous people. But to revitalize and to breathe life back into these stories and these songs has been really transformative for me personally, as a human being, as Nlaka'pamux, and as an artist. And I mean, some of my favorite, I was like some of the other stories that we've tackled, like the boy who was abandoned. I think that's, you know, all of them, they're really wonderful stories. The boy who was abandoned, which is the story of a boy who's sort of thrown away by his family because he's, in the original story that I remember, is actually because he was lazy. He didn't do any of the work. But the way that we interpreted it is we took him as he was kind of a little shit. He was kind of a pain in the butt, and his family got sick of him being kind of a nuisance. And so they tied him to a tree, and they put pitch in his eyes and blinded him. And the forest helped him. Nature helped him, taught him, and he became humble, and he became useful and skilled and good through the training that nature provided him. And even the sun takes pity on him. You know, I always remember Samba being that beautiful sun, and the song that he had to sing and all that stuff. And but also the story of Spider, Ant, and Fly, the Council of Spider, Ant, and Fly, which which is the story of how death came to be into the universe. In the Sketakwl era, everybody was kind of like immortal, and it's the insects, the smallest beings, that decide that death should come into the world, and the consequences of that, and the first mourning, the first mourning rituals come out of those death that has arrived. I always found that a really profound story. All of them are really profound stories. That's the thing, is they sort of have the entire breadth of human experience sort of embedded within them. And even though they can sometimes be silly, especially around, you know, anything dealing with a coyote or stuff, like, you know, sometimes coyote poops and he talks to his poop and has conversations and stuff like that with his own excrement. But they're really profound, deep, amazing stories.
I think what's important, that for me, just because I've kind of, you know, really followed and tried to access as many of these stories as possible to understand the scope of them, you know, a lot of this work for us is like, we say revitalization, we say resurgence, but I don't think we have to revitalize it. The vitality is already there. It's just sort of uncovering it. The sheer antiquity of these stories, of some of these stories, is mind-blowing, and it needs further work and interpretation, and people will start to begin how amazing it is. Like some of the stories that we've traced with some narrative from elders like Annie York is like the story of Crane. And that story apparently was told by the ancestors on the top of Mount Baker when it was flooded 12,000 years ago. And so that story goes back pre-Ice Age or whatever, but has been handed down through floods and fires, smallpox 1, 2, residential schools, Stephen Harper, what we're going through right now. And so for me, when this kind of gets hot potatoed into my hands, I can't just go, oh, that's nice, and it's survived the floods. It calls to me to find further interpretation and connection to it, and so that our young people can see themselves in these stories and see how excellent they are. But I think that we as Indigenous people kind of lack the support materials to translate these stories. Because now I have a son, so I think about kids' books all the time, and kids' materials. And what do you see out there all the time? It's pandas, it's giraffes, it's rhinoceroses and elephants. Why don't we have beaver and coyote, mink, and all these animals and characters, so that our young people are seeing these characters, are familiar with them, are learning about their values, so when we step into these stories as adults, we have a different lens to kind of interpret the messages and the syntax that's been handed down to us. And so when I think those things, it just gives me another job of trying to create kids materials.
Yeah.
Hence the coloring books, hence some ideas for kids stories. And also some of the work now that I'm doing with Auntie Sharon is like taking her requests for materials for language stuff and using some of and just creating materials because they don't exist.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much knowledge contained in those stories. Like even the revelation of, like, we have stories about antelope. There are no antelope in Lytton. There are no antelope in the Fraser Canyon. Where are there antelope? Down in, like, Colville, over in Montana. And our people, when we know through our stories, used to go and would trade and camp with our relatives in Montana and down in Colville, and trade and intermarry, and like sometimes spend a couple of years down there and then come back with trade goods and trade them back to our people, and then a few years later go back down and this continuing cycle. Like, they're in our in burial sites, they find buffalo skulls and buffalo robes in Lytton, and there's no buffalo anywhere near Lytton. Where are there buffalo? There were buffalo in Montana, and those areas, right? Like, or back in the day, more eastern and more southern, and that relationship, often we're thought of as a people that are static. Like, if you're from this band or this reserve or this nation, that somehow in the minds of folks that's the only place that we ever went to. But we traveled and we traded, and we had these extensive trade routes throughout the territories, and not just within our traditional boundaries, but beyond. And we shared and traded resources all throughout the West and into the plains. And that's reflected in our stories, like the fact that we have stories about antelope, and there are creation stories or foundational stories about antelope, which we don't have in our territory directly. I just find that stuff fascinating. And that story about, like, Mount Baker within our territory, right? Like, we have oral tradition that represents that reality, right? And the fact that those stories are that old, and so many of those references too talk about, like, how old and some of these songs are, how old some of these stories are, that they come from an earlier time.
Well, it's like, the area of, there's Coyote's son, then there's Coyote, then there's old Coyote, then there's old man. It's like these different eras that, and I think through further interpretation, probably through language, and you can start to look at those things. Like, they talk about Coyote retreating through his ice house, and and it's so connected to land. So another process for me is, like, I've been doing place name stuff here in the Lower Mainland, but I really want to do a Coyote map, just all where all the Coyote things happened up there, just so that we can look at it and see it and understand it. And I think those are really important things. And for me, it's kind of it's a basis of the work that I've been doing now, is just to understand these things, especially as a hip hop artist. You know what I mean? I did a lot of songs about rap for other rappers, and if I'm going to contribute anything, then it should have some sort of knowledge of the cosmology that my ancestors were in tune with. So the more I study it, the more I understand it, and the more I can sort of interpret it, either through art or through music, or
Yeah, that's a really interesting point too, because, like, as a theater artist, like as an actor, when we go to, like myself, I went to a conservatory theater training program, and the importance that is put on someone like Shakespeare, for example, who's a genius, no doubt, but is speaking from a very particular culture and a very particular understanding of the universe and cosmology, and that is, you know, trained onto me as a young performer and artist, and sort of presented as the pinnacle of the art form. And I, as an Indigenous person, go, well, where are our origin stories, and what is our cosmology? What are the narratives that we want to share that come from our own understanding of the universe and our experience as people here, and that is, you know, sort of reaching into these stories for that kind of, and creating work that is based off of that is, it speaks to me in a much deeper level than trying to, you know, often Shakespeare is done in a way that to make it relevant, they sort of place it in the future, or they put it in a different era, or they, you know, put it and set it in World War II or something to make it more current.
Stick feathers on it.
Yeah, and so like we and I've been in a show that was like that, right? Like that was an Indigenous King Lear. And in some ways it worked really well. In other ways it didn't quite work. But like it was a wonderful experience, and it was one of our, you know, Indigenous actors' dreams to have that story told in that way. And I was honored to be a part of it. But the work that we do in the community, which is much more humble, it's not in a big art center. It's not, you know, like I said, we build our own costumes. We have a cardboard aesthetic where we make our masks and everything and costumes sometimes. Like I was dressed up as Sir Wilfrid Laurier and Borden as, you know, cardboard man, right? For the last version of the Words of Our Chiefs that we did. And all of our masks, our big bird masks and animal masks that we make, were made out of cardboard. But in many ways, it's much more richer experience, because it is so rooted in those ancient stories, but also that community element as well. I just wanted to ask to sort of move us along to the end of this. What are your thoughts or hopes and dreams for the future in terms of this work that we've been engaged with now for over a decade? What are some of the things that you hope for, Sharon, to see come out of this work?
Well, I've been thinking about it, and I've been yammering about it. And I was out on a field work yesterday with Dakey. It's your uncle, eh? Dakey and Jean. And there's 4 of us that were out looking at their young shoots coming up, and Jennifer Brown was taking pictures. And I just can't stop thinking about, again, how can we interpret what we're teaching here to real life is the only way I can explain it. And it goes right along with what Ronnie is saying, what you're saying, Kevin, is that we need to somehow appreciate Mother Earth. Mm-hmm. And over the years, and I'm talking about 20, 30 years that I've been involved with students, and to interpret, you know, what we elders see, how can we interpret it so that it combines with the young people. And Ronnie, you're into you know, your rap music, or music that you're involved in. What comes to my mind is if we could develop kind of like a fast moving scenario of young people welcoming us elders back, and that's welcoming us back home. Welcome back home. Because we have been taken away from our parents. We've been taken away from our grandparents who should have been teaching us. And so if I think, Ronnie, you know what I'm getting at is that, yes, we're out there looking at the young shoots coming up, and the word Jennifer is taping us, but is there a way somehow that we can get the young people in there to be the forefront runners in welcoming us back. And when they do that, they're welcoming all the culture, the language, the tradition that is with us. But we want to catch up to the young people in their way of talking, in their way of actions, and so that we can combine. That's what's been going through my mind. I would say in the last couple of years, and right after our shows, Kevin, I was thinking of writing up something, and then take it from there and involve the young people so that it becomes their story, but with a legacy of we elders involved in it. But let the young people pick it up from there and let them welcome us back home. To our, if the residential school wasn't there, we would have all been free of hurt and pain and disasters. We would have been working as one to help each other, to help the community, to help the young people. It would have all been there, but it isn't. So you get what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
I want to write something. Yeah.
Yeah. To sort of welcome us back to the way that we were.
Yeah.
Welcome us
Yeah.
home to that wholeness that you keep talking about,
Yeah.
Sharon, that
Yeah.
oneness. Like I was always fascinated by the Shishkin, the pit house down on all those sites down on like the battlefield,
Yeah.
which is that same land that the residential school occupied, right?
Yeah.
Which is like the
Yeah.
center of our community, really. When you look at it
Yeah.
geographically, it's the best land right across the river from the Stein Valley, which is the
Yeah.
center of our spiritual beings. And
Yeah.
to see that the residential school occupied that land, it was no coincidence, right? Like that was deliberate. That's the
Yeah.
that's the most important lands to us.
It is.
And down on that some of those fields, you can see the remnant, and all over the territory. You can see the remnants of these pit houses.
Yeah.
And I used to go around with uh, Chief Nathan Spinks back when I was a student, and he used to show me some things, and he used to talk about how like there used to be one big pit house, and that would be the gathering pit house. That like you would have like a whole bunch of little ones, and then there would be like one big one, and that big pit house they would do their winter stories, winter ceremonies. And I was always like, well, what is that? Like, what were those ceremonies? What were those stories that were shared in that big pit house? What was that like to be in Nlaka'pamux and to have that as a part of your annual part of what you did? I mean, I as a youth, I went on my spirit quests and my solos and did my time up in the mountains and stuff like that. But I was always curious about like what else did we do? Like what were those dances and those ceremonies and those songs that would have been shared in that way, right? Before the residential school came and sort of damaged all of that. There's like winter ceremonies, right? That we would have been attended to that we don't practice anymore to the same degree or at all. And as always, just as a youth, I was always really sort of hungry for that understanding and that knowledge. And I think in my own way, this project has been a way to try to reach back and to try to find a way forward from those stories.
Yeah.
In the way that I know how to do it as me and who I am in this era, right? And with the background that I have. That's kind of, I had that feeling when we were gathered that first time in the symposium, right? Like that feeling of a gathering to come together to really have a council about this work and really have a discussion, but again, we were doing it in a hall, we weren't doing it in that shishkin, that big gathering pit house.
Yeah.
Ronnie, do you have any thoughts?
For wishes.
Yeah, like future.
Yeah. I mean, I'd hope that we continue to to just explore and further understand these stories. And, you know, I think as we keep going, there will be new ways to look at them and share them. I hope that through this work, we'll get past the bashfulness of being Indigenous. You know, racism and discrimination has made it, and residential school and forced assimilation has made it hard for a lot of us to just feel proud in our own skin and our own bodies. Makes us feel awkward as hell in ceremony and in culture. And that's hard. That's hard to hold your culture and feel awkward doing it just because, you know, you don't know what people are thinking or whatever. So, you know, I hope that we can create that space so people can get over that bashfulness of practicing culture and thinking indigenously and practicing their voice and moving their dancing legs for the first time in generations, maybe. So, you know, I come from, you know, I was lucky enough to grow up with my grandparents, and I got to do ceremony, but my parents didn't. And there's a big separation between us that, you know, they kind of like, what is this you're doing kind of thing, where to me, I feel it, you know? So we have to be able to try to create that dialogue and that space for, you know, adults and elders and kids to sort of have that interaction to get over the bashfulness of it, so that we can start to really grow these stories. And that's what's kind of happening, is that, you know, in the relationships that we built with the community and in Kūkūmchéyp there, not just I think the kinship with the community, but the kinship with the land there as well, going back on, you know, going back to Stein there and doing stories that are connected to the lands, singing songs that were sung there generations before, telling stories that our ancestors told in those spaces, I think is a huge part of our interconnection with our ancestry and our interconnection with the collective consciousness of who Nlaka'pamux people are. And it's new and it's different. And a lot of the times when things are new or different, our people don't accept it. But they've accepted what we've been doing. And I think it's touched people's hearts in a good way. And that's the only way you can do it. And by bringing elders and bringing kids together, I think that's, you know, that's got to be a huge part of the model. And so, you know, from Jump Street, from day one of this work, it's changed the path of my career and the path of the passion work that I do. So yeah, I mean, I hope that we can get past this pandemic part and make sure community health is always at utmost, but I can't wait till we can, you know, continue to build and continue to, you know, as these kids get older, man, Ethan's going to start talking soon, you know what I mean? And he's going to have ideas, and that's where the power is going to come from, is when these kids who've been growing up with these stories go, no, it should be this way. Oh, that's when I'm going to put my hands up. I'm going to be like, all right, we're right where we should be. So yeah.
I think you brought up a couple of really good points there, Ronnie. And I'm really having a time. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, we can hear you.
Because my headset here keeps cutting out. But talking about, I want to give you a quick example. I did a workshop at Stein Valley at the Asking Rock. And I went ahead and I yammied, like my culture says that if you're going to do, if you're going to help people, you pray for 4 days. So I did that, and I did the workshop at the Asking Rock, and we have a little picnic area there. So traditionally, everybody says their own prayers when they come into the grounds. And so I ask the mountains to help everyone that comes to the workshop to help them to hear and to share and to listen to what is being shared among all of us. Like I was doing the workshop, but I was part of the group. So when we left, I told everybody that I'm going to pray again to the mountains and ask them to give us back our voices. That was part of our tradition, is that we ask Mother Nature, you know, we're going to be loud, we're going to be laughing, and we're going to be joyous for a couple of hours, and then I go back and I said, I'm going to pray that the mountains give us back our voices. But in doing that, when we walk away, we are leaving behind all the hurt and pain and sorrow that any one of us may have experienced. And that was huge, because we had just lost a couple. And the children were there, and they shed tears. And I told them that when we walk away, we're going to leave some of that hurt and pain. And they really cried then. And I said, that's okay. They're with you. They're still with you. And they want you to move ahead. So that's just an example of leaving the hurt and pain, leaving it behind when you leave the mountains, because you have your voice back, and when you're going home. So that's an example of becoming whole again. I don't know if I'm making sense, but
No, you're making total sense.
yeah. So that's an example of it's not something that you can see or feel. It's there. Our ancestors are with us all the time, and they're nodding their heads. Jinwan, you know, Jinwan, you're doing it right. You're doing good. You know, Jinwan. So and what Ronnie is saying is beautiful, because if we can interpret that or add it on to what you're doing already technically, you know, I think we will hit the nail on the head with the community, with the youth, and with everyone. And to for loss of how to explain it, drag in Uncle Dakey and Auntie Jean and continue with the work that we're doing. It's on the side, but it's totally, it's whole. And that brings me to just finish with what Kevin was saying about the longhouse. That again is it's so hard to find the English words for Nlaka'pamux. It is.
Say it in Nlaka'pamux, and then.
Yeah. Stakam na, yeah, shko, stakam. They have a good heart, they have a good feeling. There is no sorrow when they have community meetings. And that is what is missing in so many aspects of people's lives, is that they worry about getting in a fight with a spouse. They worry about hitting their kids, and they know they shouldn't. It's sorrow that pokes holes into our wholeness. We need to get back to that wholeness, where we don't feel guilty about anything that we might have accidentally done or did it on purpose. It is that coming back to that pure wholeness, and that is scary for so many people. They're afraid to say, well, yeah, I shouldn't have got in a fight with my wife. I shouldn't have got in a fight with my husband. But that's what's drawing them back. And with our students, when they get into an argument, it is huge. You might not see it right away, except counselors. We have counselors that help our students when they get into really deep hurt feelings. And it is that hurt feeling that you don't see. And what Uncle Nathan was saying about the pit houses and the gathering, that people, they come in as one, and they share with each other. They help each other. And we Nlaka'pamux people are humorous people. And I remember my elders. I'd be when I don't know. I guess I was 4 or 5 years old, and visitors would come in, and us children would be put on mattresses on the floor, and then the elders would talk well into the nighttime, and I'd hear them, and they'd laugh and giggle and laugh, and then I'd laugh, and then my mother would come, wait a minute, go to sleep, my mother would say, because she knew I was listening to what they were saying, and they're humorous. So we are happy-go-lucky, humorous people, but we're losing that because of the colonialism, and we're always afraid, oh, what did I do wrong now? That we have to get rid of that somehow.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
That makes beautiful sense. That makes beautiful sense. At the NAC and my job here in Ottawa, um, I sort of have this slogan that is a sort of like that's become like this the sort of slogan for the department and sometimes even for the whole NAC, and that is our stories are medicine. And I came up with that based on the work that we do. That our stories are medicine. That the sharing and the indigenous understanding of the meaning of medicine, not in the Western pharmaceutical or like medical tradition, but like in the indigenous medical tradition of holistic, full body, full spirit, full mind medicine. That our stories and our songs, they are medicine, and that gathering is medicine. Those receiving those stories is medicine. It's good for the when you hear it and you hear it in an audience. There's studies that have even been done for like modern theater where audience members in a theater will often breathe together and their heartbeats will align to each other in relationship to each other and being in these big groups and experiencing a play or music or whatever.
It's called narrative transportation. It's what it's called. Narrative transportation is when your system aligns with whatever story is being told. And that's a big thing I think that's a huge part of our culture was when a community tells a story together. If you've ever been to a potlatch, and there's all the songs coming in cacophony until you go to that time when the whole longhouse sings the song together, and it's a whole different level of reality. And I think when we gathering around in Lytton at the place near where Coyote's sun touched down, at the place where the two rivers are, and we gather in circle like in our ancient lodge, and all our minds are focusing on the story, and everyone's hearts are there experiencing it, telling it together. I think it activates a different part of our reality than when it's just in a book, or when you're you're thinking about it by yourself, or you find it scribbled in some tape notes somewhere. I think that's a lot of the times, I think because there's so much talk around protocol and talk about our doctrinal understanding of ceremony and it's got to be this way, instead of just picking it up and putting it into circle and bringing it to life and creating ceremony. I think we worry about what we're going to look like doing it. Whereas we put vibrations into these ancient stories, and I think it means something for those to be reverberated in that space for the first time in however many 100 and something plus years. I myself believe it's part of our revitalization. I believe a lot in like blood memory, and I think that activates our blood memory, that all that memory that lives within our genetic structure. I think it's activated, and it's good for all of us, because you see people like it's just like it's a different energy than just some sideshow at the Rivers Festival. Like people walk away from there talking and walk away as community. It's great.
Yeah, I remember even just being in like going into like the pub after at one point and having one of our big warriors walk up to me and go, "I was the abandoned boy." Like that was my story, and I go, "Yeah, man, I believe that." And I think they are medicine, and I'm really honored that you guys have been working with me in this way. And everybody who has been, everybody And you know, there's something about that too. Like we take this work of these ethnographers who in their own context are colonial, you know, like who are settlers, some more than others, all of them outsiders. And we as Nlaka'pamux taking our own stories and interpreting them in our own way for our people is a process of decolonialism. You know, like is our own humble efforts to decolonize our story and to move us forward in a good way, and based off of our own you know histories and beliefs and the legacy that we want to leave forward, and not the legacy that other people want to represent for us. And I think that's really great work. And I you know, personally, I could do this work for the rest of my life, and I'll be fully satisfied. Anyways, it's been just about 2 hours now, and so I just want to say kʷukʷscéyp. Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation about this work, and I sure hope that we can gather again back in Nlaka'pamux and do this work like we've been doing for the last 10 years.
Look how much I care. What do you think you're doing? Have you all got...